Continue with our last discussion, the concluding discussion here, and it will be moderated by Mönninger. Before I introduce Mönninger, I would like, sorry, is there something? No, but I can say something. After the concluding discussion here on the panel, Kristin, Hitoshi, Martha, and Hans-Jürgen will give you the final address, the closing address, and since I will take a seat on the next panel myself, I would like to thank you all for coming here and sharing your incredible experience and your very challenging and inspiring thoughts with us. So thank you very much for coming here, and I think it was a great and big event, but also a very intimate event at the same time, which I really liked. So everybody got to know each other, and I think this is one of the best parts of this summit. So I'd like to moderate. I'd like to introduce. No, I don't want to moderate this. No, no, not at all. Not at all. No. Our moderator of this concluding panel is Mönninger. He is a professor of history and theory of the art of building and space in Braunschweig at the Braunschweig University of Art in Braunschweig. So Michael has researched and published extensively on the history of architecture, design, and urban planning, focusing particularly on the post-war period. He's also a member of the Arts Advisory Board of the German Federal Ministry of Transport, Building, and Urban Development. In between his academic work, he has been an editor, architecture critic, and correspondent for leading German newspapers and current affairs magazines. Michael is also a long-time friend of IAES and ANCB. Thank you for coming.
Dear colleagues and friends, we are here on an education summit. And if you agree, a summit means common exercise in climbing a mountain. That means yesterday we started at common ground, I think it's nearly below sea level, and today we are very high up in the air. I think this metaphor is right. No, the question remains, are we on the same mountain? Or did we lose each other and everybody is on his own mountain? That means, Mark, do you hear me? Mark? No. Michael, hello. Oh, the acoustic is good, but the sight is not good. I doubt whether we are on the same mountain. And my role is now to fill this glass. And being a Sherpa, that means transporting all the things our experts lost on their running up the mountain, or all the heavy things they didn't want to take, and I am the Sherpa. Fortunately, I have some co-Sherpas with me, which will carry all the forgotten things and the heavy weights, and I like to introduce you to my colleagues on this panel. At first, Hitoshi Abe. I don't think after yesterday it's necessary to introduce you. Hitoshi, will you come here? Don't be shy. Where are you? There. Hitoshi is from the General Coordinator, University of California, UCLA in Los Angeles. Then the next Sherpa is Christoph Gengnagel. He is new today. Christoph, will you come to stage? He's a professor of structural design and technology in University of the Arts in Berlin. He is a co-founder and partner of A.Key.A. Ingenieur in Munich, and he's also partner at Bollinger Grohmann Ingenieure. Klaus Bollinger, please send in my best wishes. 20 years ago when I left Frankfurt, he was my after-tenant of my apartment. At that time, a very modest apartment, but Klaus was also a very modest designer at that time. And he is now president of the University of Arts in Berlin. Next is Dietmar Leyk. I don't need to introduce you, Dietmar. Come on stage. Oh, he's really here. The famous Winnie Maas. Winnie, where are you? Winnie, come on stage. I'm very pleased. I'm utterly moved to meet you here. I cannot say what I'm feeling. And Winnie is except his masterworks in MVRDV, the master of the Y Factory, a think tank of future cities, and the Y Factory offers experimental ways of dealing with the future design in our cities, and the Y Factory runs independent research projects, PhD programs, and design studios aiming to publish the result through a variety of media. And yeah, Winnie Maas. And last not least, Mette Ramsgaard Thomsen, a professor and head of technology and architecture in the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts in Copenhagen. Mette, come to us. Mette is working with interactive technologies. Her research centers on the relationship between crafts and technological framed through digital crafting. Her work is practice-led and focuses on the design of spaces that are defined by physical as well as digital dimensions, and she taught at diverse universities worldwide. So this was the the corollary things, and now Sherpas, are you ready? We have nearly 90 minutes. An additional weight we have to carry is there are 10 masters from the first session yesterday, which are sitting spread out all over this big mountainscape here, and they should be also integrated in our discourse. So we have to summarize a little bit the 2 days we attended. We have to present all the interesting things, our new Sherpa colleagues on the podium, and we have to integrate the 10 masters. And this is in 90 minutes. I think you feel how the heat is rising here. My first question is to our panel colleagues. We have been talking yesterday about alternative platforms, about a new practice-based educational ways of teaching and learning. We heard about the one-to-one scale projects, which are very, very in need to be transmitted to the students. But when we talk about alternatives, we didn't talk about the rule. We talked about the longing for exceptions, but we didn't concentrate on the existing situation of universities. And that's my very simple question. What is the biggest failure or the biggest insufficiencies in contemporary education and contemporary universities? Mette, if you will try to answer this question, what is the real boring thing in existing institutions?
Yeah, this is working. I think one of the key things I would think, which we were discussing yesterday and which I also see in my own environment, is a sort of stifling perception of the relationship, or stifling perception of what it means to be a student and what it means to be a professor. So this idea of the master and the student, and that the dissemination goes one way. And I think we talked about it yesterday, but I also think that it's a dissolving notion. I don't think it's happening anymore, or I think it is true, but there are many other things are true too. So when I look at my students, I also see collaborators, co-investigators. I see people who inform me of things I didn't know before, because they learn from a much larger field than from just the university itself or from the academic institution itself. I also see people who become my interns or my assistants. They become my PhD students or my colleagues in 5 minutes. So I think this idea of the fluidity of the relationship between people, who they are and who I am and what they become in 5 minutes, means that it's much more dynamic than sort of the idea of the hierarchy within the institution. So I don't know. I'm describing the solution to it, but I think in reality the problem would be that the university wants to continue or to establish this setup. It's necessary to be able to understand what is staff doing and what are students doing.
Winnie, the same question to you. When you founded the Y Factory, that was also a reaction of the insufficiencies of your Dutch university system. what is the biggest failure or the biggest insufficiency you've noticed?
Okay, the danger now is that you only hear now negative parts. That's okay, fine. Because if there's one thing that I am excited about is the word, say, design, and how the world is longing for design. So, with all the critique that I'm now going to throw over you as a kind of vomit, is you have to see that in the excitement of that word. If I look not only to the Netherlands, but especially also to Germany, and I look to most of our universities and the faculties in architecture, then I compare that with other kind of faculties and other kind of, say, professions in the world, then I see one of the most stupid organizations in the academia. Why? Because it is over stiff. There is no space in many of these universities to maneuver. It is reigned by an enormous amount of people that stay too long and that cannot move at all. It is there is an incredible tendency all over the planet, and maybe is that we do all the same, all the universities. There's almost no specialization except for the people that are here, by the way. Don't forget, and by some of them, and that I therefore see such a huge redundancy and a waste of money that that if I would be a dean, and then I would be so angry to redo that and to get that change. So that is in short what I would like to add to the nice theoretical discussion that you're having, but in order to get rid of that kind of components, that seems to me the next target for the coming 2 years before we have the next conversation on this.
The same question to Christoph.
Okay, well.
I'm sorry, but it's a very crucial question.
Well, I would say, yes, schools of architecture, especially in the German-speaking countries, are still very, from my point, very conservative. So they're still very hierarchical in the inner organization. And I think, if I compare this to my own profession in engineering, I think we are working in a different method now, more like Mette. We both are working together maybe for this reason. We don't have this, not this hierarchical organization in the working process, even in the teaching process. And I think this is one of my concerns about architecture. They could do this much more better, but I think they have to change. Maybe it's coming from in Germany or in a German-speaking country, the majority of the professors are coming from the practices. It's a very nice idea, they're doing both. But therefore we have the same, sometimes the same organizational structures in the offices and universities, and I don't see that as the task of the university to have exactly the same organizational formats.
Mm-hmm. And perhaps afterwards you can explain what are you doing better in the UDK here in Berlin. Dietmar, I skipped you because I wanted to have the Berlin aspect, but what is in your point of view the insufficiency of contemporary education in traditional institutions? We heard stiff, unspecialized, conservative, hierarchical, another insult?
First of all, I agree, but I think like our daily life as architects, it's about what we heard also yesterday, it's about confidence and doubt. So our daily life is about confidence and doubt, and so if you don't have confidence, you're lost. If you don't have doubt, you're dead. So and something like this is maybe missing also at the academia, that it's not only about giving confidence, but also giving the students some methodology how to deal with doubt. A lot of things coming out of this thinking that you doubt what your teacher says. You have to doubt it, otherwise you're not critical. But on the other hand, you also have to learn. If you be a pragmatic teacher, you can say, okay, the first 2 years it's a teaching program, it's a training program, and then you learn to think. But I don't believe in this. I think you can also have doubts in the first year. That's something you have to deal with as a teacher doubt and confidence, and I don't think it's really happening at the universities. I'm not talking about Berlin or Germany, or it's like this in many universities I've seen.
And Hitoshi, the situation for you the same? What is your complaints?
It's more like a question. I mean, I have kind of two different backgrounds, being professor in Japan and then moved to Los Angeles, and then I didn't realize that how different they were until I actually started this chair position at UCLA. But that also represents, let's say, more of the issue in American system, and I will just use Japan, example as a way to kind of make it clear. In Japan, the education of architecture is not to prepare any practitioner. It's basically to provide the general sort of education to anybody who will maybe participate in sort of a community of architecture. So only maybe 5 to 10% of the students will become the architects. The rest will be contractor or researcher or engineer and so on. So that's very general. And then professional training will be done after they graduate, so in each offices and so on. So it's really different from United States that actually almost 95% of the students want to be architect in and then accreditation process kind of make sure that we provide the training, the basic training to kind of produce architect. And that really sort of set the kind of goal for everybody, that the student will not want to go for practice after the graduation, so on. That's the destiny of the professional school. But then the problem is, if the role of academia is about to question like what the actual practice is about and to expand it, then there's no room in the curriculum to pursue that, because in a medical school or in an engineer school, they have like a doctor system, postdoctoral system, so that the research itself can kind of sustain with a different sort of a mechanism. But it's so difficult to set it up in an American way, because most of the doctoral students are more like a history theory, and it's very hard to establish. Like you said, you started the post sort of graduate kind of a researcher position. And then, we need to come up with something. Otherwise, it's so difficult to really sort of sustain the research within a university. And that's the part that's really difficult for me. By the way, in Japan, we have a laboratory system that kind of takes care of that, so that you have within the department like the laboratory for the structure, advanced environment, and the design is only part of it. I don't say that that's the best system, because there's another kind of a problem actually in Japan, but at least the Japanese example really sort of make the issue of the American system sort of clear to me.
It's interesting, you didn't talk about one problem yesterday. I thought it was the first or second panel, I don't know who said to it, that the biggest problem of the traditional universities is comparable the dilemma of big theaters or big opera houses. You have a staff of actors who want to play the role of the young dynamic lover, even if they are rolled in by a wheelchair, if they are 90. And I think if you are a civil servant as a professor, you have a lifelong job. You will teach 30 to 40 years, and do you see this is a problem of the lifelong professorship, to be at the end in a wheelchair, rolling in the seminar and teaching the students how to change the world? Mette, what is your opinion?
Well, I'm a very new professor, so
so let's talk again in 40 years.
I embody this problem very beautifully, but I think it's a beautiful picture, and I think I think any institution is full of that feeling, that there's people there that are not working on the same problems of the same urgency, the same importance that you yourself feel that your questions are. Of course, I'm very much part of an institution where I feel these things are happening. But I think the problem maybe in Danish, it sounds a little bit better than in English, but is emerging practices. Emerging practices sounds a little bit vague, I think, but this idea that our field is extremely dynamic, and the things that we need to work with and confront and therefore also teach are changing all the time. And I know that Winke said yesterday that computation is old now, but I teach computation and I think it's very new because it's a 20-year profession or a 20-year set of tools, and they are, or maybe 50, 60, depending on how you think of them, but they are still very young compared to the discussion of Alberti we were also having yesterday. You know? So how is it that this, as a new set of tools, is in my field, but it could be conservation, it could be how do we work with old buildings, how do we work with environmental issues, many different emerging practices that are appearing. How do we think about them not only as something that is added to the curriculum, but something that undermines and changes the curriculum? Or I don't even really want to talk about curriculum, but really about the knowledge space that we're sitting in, or the design space that we're sitting in. So for me, when I work with computation, computation is a ground research question. It sets into doubt everything that I know about architecture. The fact that I can code design space is radically different from projective geometry and the logics of that. So I think that any emerging practice should and will and does undermine what it is that we know. And so the geriatric professor must sit on a wheelchair of needles or something, no, where you are always being confronted with the fact that what you know is not true in 5 minutes.
So should there be a limit, an age limit for wheelchair professors? And should they be expelled if they are over 50 plus, or no? That's bullshit. Winnie, your experience, and normally you are the one who gives a discourse about your work, and you are now half Sherpa, half Winnie Maas. But please give us your opinion about this problem of age. Not of age, but of your reaction to the system of Dutch universities, and why you founded the Y Factory. What are you doing otherwise there?
I have a question for the main Sherpa. Is it because did you have now already? Is the list that we made about what is wrong? Is that already enough? Because I see that you are deepening.
If you give a positive example of your Y Factory, we have that implies what is wrong with the existing system.
First about the age issue, because and then I go to the Y Factory issue, because there are fantastic old people sometimes, and I still love that Aldo van Eyck, that we couldn't get rid of him in Delft when I was there. With a hammer, with nothing, like he didn't leave the building at all, and he was brilliant in that, because at any moment there was an example of aging very well. And that is so I think it's an issue. What you actually ask is, do we add some kind of quality judgment on professors or how they do things, and how can we somehow make them flourish them? That is what I can see when I look to Van Eyck in how he was behaving himself. And I do think in his case, what was the most fruitful to make him more flourishing, it was his endless oppositions against him. So the more oppositions he had, the better he became. And that fascinated me enormously. And so this kind of treating someone very badly, it in this case, it helped in a way to make him better. Maybe I've behave the same, or I feel that I get the same kind of reactions around me, especially. But that's that could be the. What about the Y factory? There was one reaction today that was a remark, because we are now about concluding. We're now about concluding this event, and there was one person that said today to me, "Nah, we talked too much about what we are doing." In that way, I haven't been there, right? So I'm just like now the reporter of what, and I can maybe later give the name to him, and is that we show too much maybe what we are doing, say the good examples partly also in it, where we learn from. And on the other hand, of course, we have to, we also are here to think and to make the next step. And there's a role in that way for the main Sherpas to make the good list ultimately to the organizers and to advise them on this issue. So that makes me a bit vulnerable if I would say what to talk about the Y Factory. I was asked the last time to do that, and I did it with pleasure, and I don't want to repeat that. But of course, it's connected to my observation. What is wrong? I do think that if you give people opportunity, good people, and give them for a long time opportunity, then you don't give a professor only say his salary for 2 days a week and say assistant for maybe 16 hours. That doesn't work. That's really stupid. Let's make plans and ask to make plans and set it up accordingly. If someone needs for a research 20 people in that way, I think if we can facilitate that as a complete say the global network of universities to make that, then I think we are doing a good job. And if the specific plans of this kind of research is by different weirdos, if they are as weird as possible, and then we should give that space. That's what the Y Factory somehow tried to embody in its own specific small world. So I think that's also one of the things that this group should try to establish. By meeting, by pleading to leaders that should be more possible. That's my best answer I can give to you. How we could create, say, more innovation, and how we can create also like a global, say, series of positions where they are more specific, more crazy, and more deep. At that moment. And I think then, as a student, I can shop around. I'm happy to go to your university because you do something. And finally, I will be in Braunschweig, I would say. And then I, which always was for me like the model of nowhere. And it's like, not because of you, but it's, and they, so there was, and then I want to be in that nowhere place also. So I do think that, and that sometimes it happens within the architecture education. Sometimes you see it emerging, but we have to enlarge it. That's the only thing what I would plead for in that way, to learn from, say, the Y Factory example. And then I would say, because then we are more equal somehow also, because then you have the same possibilities, then I have larger as much. Then I can compete with you. Can I become weirder than you, I hope, or more specific on my element in that way? And I think that encourages also, therefore, the depth.
I'm studying in nowhere. Actually, I study in Braunschweig, and I have a lot of experience about coming from this place. I also study in other places. But what I think that the big motherships of universities, they are looking now for satellites all over the world to exactly play this freedom, to go out and say, look, in this case, we are different. So we go to Singapore or we go to Hong Kong or wherever, but they are motherships. They are very stiff, and it has a lot to do with it has a lot to do with repetition. So all the curricula are built up on repetition. Every semester, every year, the same thing. So the professors have to get bored, the students get bored, and I really like the contributions during these 2 days, which dealt with case studies. So they went out with their students to work on case studies, and all around the case studies you can study history, you can study technology, you can study design, whatever, but it's based on case studies. So you don't fall into the trap of repeating the same museum design every year. And this is what I really enjoyed during these 2 days, when somebody told me, look, we went out to Kentucky, we went out in India. These case studies really help to be specific, like you said. I mean, it's becoming very specific. It's not generic. You know, the studies can be very specific. Yeah,
I want to comment you, because maybe you misunderstood me a little bit. Because I do agree that the schools create a kind of landscape of specificness by going to every place and to study that. I'm fine that way. There shouldn't be an excuse also to study generic components, because that are as important as the case studies. So that's what I would like to give also a limit to the issue of the case studies.
No, I understand, and this is what I meant with confidence and doubt. You need to get confidence when you study at the university, so you have to know how an entrance works and everything, the elements of architecture. And then you also see that when you go to a certain case, you have to be very specific, because it's such a specific problem, such a specific solution. But I think in general we agree. But I really like to go out and then learn everything in one case, and then learn with another case maybe different things, because I believe you have to understand what the drivers, and I said it yesterday, what are the drivers of change? What are the drivers really which lead me to this result? And if the students don't understand what are the drivers are, they are not able to judge. I think this is really important. And if you only teach them, look, this is like a stair works, or this is like the building works, this is like this typology works, it's so stiff. You can't react in our very much changing environment. I mean, all the projects are in a different context, not physical context, but context in a way that you have different requirements all the time. So you're always challenged by new requirements, and the students have to be prepared for this. There's no recipe. Yeah.
I feel the need to make it more clear for the audience, and that how these Sherpas somehow kind of make it more accessible, what we all think. So even if you say that in Bangladesh we should do other kind of situationist studies than in Paris, I do think that Mette deserves at the moment to be not Danish. So with her institution, with your institution, if you do the complete insane but abstract study on say dataized space, then and without applying it on Copenhagen, I'm very happy that you exist, because that means that that's also a specificity at that moment. Without just to make it more clear because otherwise it becomes this kind of confusion, and then you start pleading for mapping again or something like old-fashioned.
So stop
now we can discuss
this. Dietmar, one moment. Hitoshi and Christoph, I will refrain from calling you personally by every question. You are not shy. If you have to contribute something, you take the word, and I will not be here the teacher with some pupils. Let's go to the next question. I think we have to lower a little bit the niveau, because we're losing each other out of sight, because everybody's on his own peak. But the very basic question, please don't be afraid to pose the question, what is a good teacher? Please, Mette, tell me, what is a good teacher? Don't tell me that you are a good teacher. I know you are here, that's the sign for this, but how would you describe the capacity of inspiring young people?
It's so difficult.
Yeah,
I'm thinking about
old question, new answer.
I don't know. I've had many wonderful teachers, and I wonder how they taught me. I think. Oh, thank you. So I think maybe the point is to establish a conversation, and to look at each other as equal partners across this conversation. So it's a little bit repetitive of what I was saying before, in the sense that that you are not being taught or trained. I thought it was interesting, no, this idea of training. I think training is something you do with a dog or something. You know, what does that mean to train someone, and what does it mean to teach or to share a situation of knowledge production. So if we are thinking, my own context is also maybe a little bit different because I'm the head of a research center, so what I do is research-based teaching, and I'm not involved in curriculum teaching. So I'm only with my co-students. We are all studying the problem together. I think that's what is important. And when I think of this, my best teachers, I have never had any inkling that they knew what the answer was. They were as lost as I was about what it could be where we were going, but they were pushing different sorts of directions on me, but leading me also to take the decisions about where I would go. So I don't know. Maybe we can think about differences between training and sharing knowledge production, and when one is important and when the other is important. Because I'm not saying that there isn't hard skills that are important to share also. It's very, very important. I think it's super unfair to establish teaching environments and then just say to the students, you go out and learn this. I will only talk to you about what you have already learned. I think that's also important to say, well, there are things you need to know, and I can show you how you do them. Sorry. Yeah.
Mm. So then that means a good teacher is somebody who goes out of the institution and gives you practice-based education, project-based education, and who lets you engage in his own research instead of teaching prefabricated things.
Yeah, and I think also that the student should not be assumed to do research. I think it's again also unfair to position the student as the person that is inventing the wheel or inventing the future. I think a study is different from a research project, and I think but they are very similar in their nature. So we can be parallel to each other, but the student should not have responsibility towards a research inquiry. I think what I'm trying to say is that I go to a lot of research presentations, and then I see teachers come with student projects and say, we were researching this and these are my research outcomes. And I think it's very unfair. I am responsible for my research outcomes, and the students are responsible for their teaching, for their learning. And that there's a lot of interchange between the two, but they're not the same. And I think we need to be clear about what the differences in objective are there.
There might be. I partly agree with you, Mette, because on one hand I understand. I understand completely when you say that we need that the first years of education. I'm eager for knowledge if I'm studying. So I want to have knowledge, and the hottest, latest, and deepest considerable. So on that point, I completely agree with you, and that is so the supply of this knowledge that demands for a certain kind of, say, teacher to do that. So that's my first observation. The second observation that I would like to react to is the first 4 years differ from the second amount of years, because I think in master education, where research orientation becomes important, according to me, and in that moment I think it's interesting that you offer students to go and to sit within a research group for a while, not longer than half a year probably, and then to shop around in different research methods. And there is a huge demand for that also so then such a person follows you with your obsession and your demands and learns from that. So there's also a learning process. So before you kick that away, I would say defend that part. Then two other comments I have on your question, what is a good teacher? One is that we have fantastic prizes for good researchers in society. We have good prizes, fantastic prizes for architects, and I've never seen a prize or anyway a kind of system that says that you are a good teacher. So that fascinates me. Okay, that's the good part. And then you can build up also criteria. Now I add with a personal note in that way, because you started also with that. So my best teacher when I was in Delft University, and it was beside A.UD van Eyck, which I never spoke, but because he was impossible to speak with, was a person that had a mission to tell me from the very beginning what I should do. And he did that for 3 years, even up to my graduation project. And the only thing I learned, so whatever he says, I do the contrary. And that has been, and he's having a show the coming year, because he wants to show his pupils now to the world. And in a year, because he's 75 or something, and then he ends his life somehow there. And now I have to speak out to him, that because he was my best teacher because of this. And I am now here with a personal doubt if I can do that at the end of his life, to do that. But it's but that also explains that what was not happening at that moment was consciousness. Because we need, as a teacher, I want to be as conscious as possible. I think every teacher should be there. And we need each other, we need critique to make that possible. And what lacks a lot is not only a critique from outside in the educational system, but in between. No one at Delft, the professors don't want to talk with each other and don't defend their way of dealing with students opposite each other. And that because why? They are so fearful of that, of their gained domain, and that kills ultimately, I think, the critical society that the university should give. So these 4 remarks I need to add to your question.
Mm-hmm. It's very interesting what you say, because everyday practice in universities, and not only in Braunschweig, also in the center of nowhere like Delft, I think every teacher is very eagerly obeying that nobody comes into his seminars, that no colleague can make a kind of industrial espionage. Normally, one should welcome everybody from the other department, come in my seminar, and let's have a co-teaching. I think it's absolutely the exception to the rule of complete, splendid isolation, that no teacher is co-teaching with another. Because why are they so anxious to lose their mystery, to lose their special receipt? How can we explain this? That teachers are not co-teaching, not willing to cooperate.
Christoph, is that in your case also?
I don't know. Yeah, maybe, but I'm afraid it's more because of lack of time of the professors. They don't have enough. Oh, sorry. They don't have. The majority, the professors don't have enough time to attend maybe the teaching of the others, and especially. Yeah, maybe. No.
9 hours teaching a week, and they don't have time. No.
And they have. It's. I don't. And then they have in architecture they have the. They have the scripts, and I think they believe very hard in this. This grid are enough, you know. They're sitting together and they have this grid, the middle grid, and the final review, and they believe very strong that this is they're sharing this the informations, and they're sharing knowledge in this review process, and they believe very strongly that this is enough to do. So this is what I see at our school. We're trying this to improve now. We did a first experiment. It's called a table review. It means all professors are together and we're talking with the students over the last year based on the portfolio of the students. And this is, I think, quite promising experiment. We did it the first time. It was for both sides very impressive, I would say, because in this moment the students had the feeling that we're taking them really serious, because we took really we did this over 2 days. That means we were investing a lot of time, and this is, I think, one model that could improve the situation. And at the same time, we had very interesting discussion on these tables between the professors, because it's a different situation to this normal review process. Because there you have this project, and you're talking just about the project. It's not such a controversial discussion between the professors. On this table in the discussion about the portfolio and the discussion with the students about what he has done over the last year, there was more than just a project.
Yeah. So it becomes your project.
Yes, as well. Yeah.
And that means also that at that moment that you can comment in the and we were talking about trust, and I do think that we have a kind of we need a trust of colleagues that you want to be constructive. So I can comment your methodology and saying what I miss in it or what I find fantastic in it, and so that I think that helps your program at that moment and to make it sharper. And so that's probably we all agree on that. But that's what somehow we have to institutionalize, force better in our university.
We have to leave the peak of the education, the teacher question, but last aspect would be, yesterday I talked with my colleague Jörg Leiter about this question. Jörg, are you here? No? Oh yeah. One would really like to make a study, a kind of really systematic analysis of famous teachers and their pupils and their descendants. So to say, we know who was Colin Rowe, and we know that all these architects coming from him. We know Oswald Matthias Ungers, and we know that Kohlhoff and Kohlhaas and other guys come from here. And the relation of famous good architects and their pupils. And we should try to make a kind of empiric research whether the really well-renowned architect, the prominent, the master builder, is really the best teacher. Sometimes I meet very interesting architects who come from lousy master architects as their teacher, but who had been very eager in educating and inspiring the people. That means a profile of the teacher and their the coming generation. But this is a project I will try to work out with Jörg and other colleagues. Let's go now to the interdisciplinary question. Yesterday we heard a lot of interesting things, and the most interesting was by Mark. Mark, do you hear me? Mark? Yes? Mark Wigley? Is it gone? Ah, you're there. Ah. Oh. Yeah, it's very far away. It's in another 8,000 meter high mountain in the other end of the world. And you said that an architect is becoming a discourse integrating discipline, so to say, a multi-dimensional synthesizer, communicator of ideas. That reminded me 20 years ago when Bernard Schumi took over the architectural department of Columbia as a dean, and I visited him in New York, and he told me very interesting experience that for the first years he was teaching there, he made the experience that this kind of recruiting young architects is very much changed. He said that at that time a lot of well-educated composers or filmmakers or musicians or even lawyers who had their first formation very specialized and then decided afterwards to study architecture as a kind of master of the discourse, of a discourse integrating capability of communicating, of process organization, of synthesizing very different social and intellectual skills. So if we leave this summit with a very inspiring notion that the architect will really be again the master of the universe, a demiurgical capacity of answering all the questions, which is totally specialized, and schizophrene society cannot answer. Is it true that we really, as an architect, trained, well-educated architect, has this capacity of discourse integrating, social synthesizing power? Hitoshi.
In a way, right, we all hope that that's yes.
No, no hope. Please be realistic. We are very high up in the air. There's not much air to breathe here.
Conceptually, we hope, but the reality is that the knowledge that even though we go very shallow, very wide, but the knowledge that nowadays, even the technological knowledge, is so spread and is so big And capability for, we will learn anyway by nature that how to integrate different conditions, different technology, and different politics, and so on. That's what we learn actually in architectural school. But still, maybe what will happen is that we are the generalists, but maybe there are different type of generalists, meaning that the architect who is very much sort of good at integrating particular field, and there's another architect maybe who is more, so there's a different landscape of being generalist that requires sort of slightly different sort of discipline and so on. So I more sort of believe in sort of a variety of, not only a architect, but there are different type of architect that could exist and has a different capability to integrate or specialize to generalize certain sort of area of this huge complex world. And that's kind of what I think. And then each school maybe will be more specialized into certain sort of this area. And that change kind of creates the sort of a uniqueness of each school. I mean, after hearing everything, even on this panel, I hear that they are talking about specific situation of each school and each region that different from the situation, for instance, India or China or Japan. And in that way, probably, even though that we have this kind of idea of architects being generalists, but there's differences among that. So I think that creates a differences among us.
And Christoph, do you think that your department is the secret master of the UDK universe? Are you the most important and the most comprising faculty?
If I'm comparing my own experience studying engineering and then afterwards studying architecture, what I learned from architecture, I learned to think why I'm doing what. A student of engineering means you have to learn everything, a lot of knowledge, but you never have a clue why you are doing this actually. As an architect, you are trained to think in projects quite early, and this is what I like. And you learn also to think very broad. And I think this is a great thing. And maybe we don't sell this enough as schools, that we have this special formats, and I think we should cultivate this more as we do at the moment.
If I may say something, I think it's not the architect, but it's architecture which can do this. I mean, if you think about what architecture can achieve, and it's not necessarily, of course, the architect has a certain has to have a certain knowledge, he has to have a certain also creativity, he has to have a certain genius, if you say so, but in the end it's the architecture which is in a way the mediator between all these different disciplines. And this is the great thing, if you work in an interdisciplinary team, they all are around the project, they are all around the architecture. And if you take architecture seriously, then you see, I mean, the potential of architecture, and if we discuss the potential of architecture, is not always really exploited. I believe when you work in these teams, when you get all the requirements from all the different experts, the architecture can actually provide you with a solution. And the great thing is about it that there are 10 different buildings, if you say so. They all follow the same requirements of the different experts. So they can all look different, and that's a great thing about architecture, that it's not only one solution. There are many solutions for the requirements you get from your different experts. And another aspect is, it's not new that architects work with complexity. That's old. I mean, nothing new about this. Maybe it became more complex, but in the end, you answer this with your architecture, or you decide, no, we don't do architecture. But the architecture's potential is actually much bigger than we think. I think that's my
Yeah, I agree with this, because in engineering we are using now, these days, more and more the word architecture. It's architecture of software, it's the architecture, I don't know, of something, and it means exactly this point, is architecture means complexity. And I think we should discuss this more, that we are teaching, or how we are teaching complexity, and what are the tools for this, methods for this.
But what does it mean? Ich meine, the architect is knows a little bit about everything. He's not very in depth. He's a universal dilettante. Do you agree with this universal dilettantism?
No.
Necessary to integrate all the schizopractical realms of society.
That's very personal, but I believe that the architect is an architect, and that of course he has to follow, and what I said before, he has to know about the drivers, what are the drivers which drive my design or which drive my architecture. But in the end, the architect has the potential to show how it looks. I mean, he has to visualize it. Yes, how can it be in the end? We heard this yesterday from Hubert, that in the end you say, this is how it looks like. This is what the experience will be when you go into my architecture. So, or you show how you can engage with your architecture in the real world. And I believe this is the role of the architect, in my opinion. I'm sure there are different opinions.
Yeah, what about education?
Hmm?
No,
Please pose your question. Yeah.
Sorry, but a different discussion to talk about. Now very spontaneously, I excuse myself, but it's a different discussion to talk about architecture now, and what is architecture, and how good it is if you finally have a building. We talk about how to bring Siri, or via Siri, Siri comes finally to not the only result, but to one result, and this is architecture. So I think it's better now not to continue that, but to talk about how Siri hits architecture. Mm-hmm. Practice. Yeah, how Siri hits praxis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
is it clear, my question? Also, I don't want to interrupt you, Michael.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's an open discussion, and we're nearing our mountain peaks, and we can hear and talk each other. It's an advantage. But what is the preliminaries of a good teacher educating students in architecture, which will become the discourse integrating powers? What are the ingredients of the educational model in your alternative platforms? I think more things together in one sentence is not possible. Winnie.
Oof. So there is there's something in the air here between, and that we need to make it more clear. One is indeed your question about what was it about I lost also. Yeah, I mean, I want to try to have the two opinions opposite you, because one, you say there are many possibilities for obtaining an overview, and you say yes. What's good about the architecture part that you gave us, that you could position projects towards it. So and bringing back to you and ping-ponging it back, that means there are many type of projects. And then ping-ponging it back, yeah, there is a possibility that one of us is a dilettante and the other not in that way. And so that wide range, we need that wide range, and the skills that we can try to train within the education is that that people can stand out and speak on that relative position that they are going to take. So I think that's important, and that's a bit underestimated, that most of the students, they can't speak at all in that way. They have and we need to do that, because the architecture project, and I'm sorry Dietmar on that, but it's not only the building. For a politician, we are just an instrument, and some of us are able to say to a politician, you are stupid because of this and this, and they make it possible. So that's another skill than, say, another architect that masters the technicians in that way. So I see quite a, I wouldn't mind to spend more time on the skill of, say, on argumentation, on leadership, as some of us say, on trying to be to sell, not sell, to speak about your position very clearly as such, and then because that gives also the skill that you have the relative overview. Now, yeah, and that's one observation I would like to add to three of you after listening to. Then, Kristin, your question about what does theory help in the practice is a complete new question, to be honest. After this, and it's good that you raised it, and it's indeed super needed. That's how I believe it. So the domain of being outside of the practice, and to have a territory where we can test things, experiment on things, what is not allowed or impossible in the commercial world, is super needed. And that is a thing that you can discuss with politicians somehow easily. I think Henk will also say that when there's one field that you still can, that we can still claim finance and claim, say innovation, is that specific zone, and we try. Many universities try, and we can improve that even more better. And so here also I'm quite critical on sometimes on the collaborations between universities and some kind of outsiders. There's in Holland a tendency to also incorporate offices in it, and then I'm skeptical, to be honest, because these offices have a commercial aim in that moment. And I do think that the experimental one is actually initially not commercial because there is no money for it. So this paradox that, and I embody both worlds. So personally, I try to make this distinct line between something what I can do in a commercial world, what I can't do in a commercial world, and that is and that remains very, in order also to defend that public task to innovate and to find, say, resources for that in that respect. So that's the first reaction I have to your question. So there is also an independency of between the two worlds. And yes, what does then these commercial guys benefit from that? That is very clear. They are very happy. Somehow we should tax them also, that they pay some of this innovative research that is gratuitously there. I mean, some of your stuff, our offices immediately take it over after a while. Or how Rhino was initiated at that moment. That was done at the university and later commercialized. I have never seen yet the benefits of that commercialization yet in the research groups that have made that. So there is something to discuss there on that level, how to make that better and how to get. Honestly, my plea is how, say, the elementary research, how this edgy thing over there, how did we can enlarge that and in all its means. And you do it also in your way, for instance, which I admire a lot. And so we have here some examples of that. But that I could see as a statement that comes out of this kind of gatherings. And if you want to communicate later as a foundation that says what do we want to aim, well, this kind of things I imagine that you need in order to make these summits fruitful. Does that give an answer to you?
Now we are sticking to the notion of interdisciplinarity, and we have again to clear everything. Yesterday was not explicated. If we think about interdisciplinarity up to the neurosciences yesterday, what we heard, and all other scientific realms of the arts, what remains as the disciplinary core of architecture that relates to our question of education, that relates to our question of collaboration and this interdisciplinarity. For me, as a teacher of history and theory of the arts and architecture and city and urbanism, is always the question: how do I behave? How do I treat history? what is the system of historical knowledge? What is the system of historical transmission of knowledge? Yesterday we heard him and appelled to roll over Beethoven, shake, shadow, rattle and roll with Alberti. That means destroying all the libraries of historical dust and historical weight, and begin starting from the scratch. What is the role of history, of historical philosophy in your teaching? Please give me your question without being called. How do you behave with history?
Well, in my field, is it okay, I can hear. Sorry. Okay, good. I think in my field, the history of technology becomes acutely important to understand. I think understanding what computing is and how computers came about sets a territory for understanding what it is that we're actually working with. And what I was trying to say before about that, when we're starting to work in a new kind of media, it means also we need to understand what the media was before. So I feel that I'm always working with representation. Even though I'm working with digital fabrication and coding and generative logics and whatever that world becomes, then in reality, I'm somehow always considering what is, you know, the design space of the picture plane. Like, what does it actually mean to put things on paper, and what is the depth of the drawn? So it's very traditional questions that we're looking at, but we're looking at it through technologies that are, I hope, shaking up a little bit the territory of these investigations. I think new concepts are being brought about. And bringing back to interdisciplinarity, I think what is important about these things is that the autonomy of the design space is dissolving. And I personally think computing has a lot to do with that, because there's a new platform, which means that what Wolfgang Strätler was talking about yesterday also, this idea that suddenly what we are designing is changing. We're not just designing the artifact, we're also designing the materials of that artifact. We're designing the structures of the material and how we're composing it, but also at an actual molecular level, we are involved in understanding what materials could be, and that affects how we think of structures. So I think in the breadth of it, it's really about that the territory of investigation is changing, and yet somehow it always brings back what is the relationship between the represented and the made. And these are fundamental questions. I don't think architecture will ever stop asking what that the nature of that gap would be.
So you're reflecting the history of the technical media. That means you go back to the invention of the Commodore computer or the first IBM. Or are you going back further more in the history?
MIT and the invention of servo codes for directing the missiles in the Second World War, they are fundamentally part of how it is to operate a computer now. And even though we think that, Steve Jobs invented our interfaces, it's not true at all. The way that computing acts and is working is really to do with what it was, the tasks that we needed to invent during the war. So the ability, the computing is cited in a digital material relationship. Computing comes from wanting to control CNC. So I'm sorry, but this is my field. I love it. So I think that it's too shallow to remember just the interfaces. When we talk about computing being the last 20 years, it's a very shallow space to engage. When in reality, it's a deeper way of actually mechanization. Also, it grips into industrialization. Computing in fabrication is just about controlling the tools that were already automating fabrication in the Industrial Revolution. So these kinds of concepts, I know I'm speaking very specifically. I hope that generally they are also relevant, no? Because why is the history of the Industrial Revolution important now? I think because the concepts that we're working with are cited within the changes that are afforded there.
Yeah, it's very good that you say that, and it makes your question, Michael, a little bit redundant. And it's so obvious. And I want to stress it with another story, namely that in any science, natural science, you base your innovation on what has just become before. And you always refer to that and make it slightly better, and hopefully much better in that way. And of course there's a big discourse on that issue of referencing what is true and what is not true in many sciences. But especially in the field of architecture, it is like there's so much stupidity in the word originality, and the architects all are trained to be original, and it's a slight nuance that you might have picked something from another architect, then the whole world is crazy at that moment. And they don't judge at that moment actually that he or she made that former design slightly better because he or she did at that moment some innovation on that base. So I do think that we need some kind of more advanced critique on that. And I like your research that you're doing now, going to do on this, recent generation, because somehow indeed what that might lead to when you say, okay, the Industrial Revolution is still a thing for us, that the recent history becomes so much important, more and more, and that way too, how to operationalize that in our education or in our research. So I agree with you that you studied that. Ultimately, we need you again to make a kind of, say, evolutionary machine which can, say, predict out of our DNA elements what kind of new sons and daughters will be born. That is what, so you could accompany your study at that moment completely in a kind of almost Darwinistic system. So I'm looking forward to see that, because there, innovation, hopefully in the end, is also one of the factors that you will describe, and that will be then, say, hooked up on this kind of tree of innovation that you hope to see, more than only like a morphological element, or more than only like it looks a bit like that issue. So it is so I agree that history is enormously important as such, to be trained in the first year or 2 years of education. And to make, because we see it in our works enormously, everyone reacts to history. There's almost no one which is that original that he can be outside of that.
So to say the approach of...
Okay. I would like to add some, sorry, because I also agree that history is becoming...
Louder.
History is an incredible, important fact in teaching architecture, and it's becoming. I mean, when you teach at an architecture school today, I mean, for example, Berlage or somewhere else, you have students from all over the world, and you have many Asian students. So history, to teach history is a completely new thing. So many students coming from different parts of the world, they were taught in fundamental architecture techniques, but then you talk about architectural history, you talk about Corbusier, and it's very new for many of them. So it's also a question about which history do you teach? I mean, do you teach the history where the project is? Do you teach the history of this country, or do you teach Asian history and show them the value of the Asian history, which I can't because I'm not an expert in this. But the other important point is, I mean, you're talking about innovation, but if you understand how history works, about movement and counter movements, so architecture's position and then counter positions, how evolution in architecture comes up, I think this is important. And this is probably this is global. I think this is internationally, that there is a strong movement and you react, you become critical, and you innovate something new or against it. I think to understand this, that is something you can teach.
So to say, we have passed the situation when Walter Gropius, after coming to Harvard, he threw out all the historical literature from his library. But I hear the message: history is important, but I don't believe it, because in all the seminars I'm attending, with all the seminars I talk about with the students from other colleagues. There is this call by Peter Eisenman: I don't need history, I have theory. theory is completely substituting history, and theory is to take the short way home. Theory is a kind of reduction of historical complexity. And I'd like to know, how do you implement your historical knowledge, and how far do you go back? What kind of instruments do you use to transfer historical knowledge to your students?
I think Eisman didn't become a good researcher because of that. That's exactly, that's why he didn't become a good researcher, exactly because of that quote.
But first, Mette,
perhaps Hitoshi? No? Mette, okay.
Well, well, I want to react to the idea of what we were talking about before, because I was just thinking that there's something at stake also, which also I heard yesterday a lot, which is this idea about that we're building for a better future. I think we were talking about a better tomorrow, and I think there's something about this idea of optimization that somehow we will always be able to get to better questions and better solutions, and it's a sort of progressive machine that we're sitting inside of. And I think it's very inherent to architectural thinking from a humanist point of view that we are servicing, someone was saying yesterday, servicing the community, and we create something that is better for them. But I wonder if this is really if we can actually talk about that and how we complicate the idea of optimization, especially also through ideas of technology. The technology somehow always will provide us a better future. I think we must put that into doubt.
I think yesterday
optimization is temporal, so it's it prolongs at the moment that within the optimization methods you have improved and enlarged parameters. So so there's still a demand, or say any 5 years we can have another kind of optimization.
I think optimization somehow depends on that you close down the parameters that you're working with. That you say, I set the problem space this big, and now because I have 5 parameters instead of 500 parameters, then I can start developing solutions within that solution space. And I think what we were talking about before about interdisciplinarity is that the point is that it's contradictory. We can say that architecture is somehow a mediating role, but the point is that all the information coming into the design space is it's not smoothly coming together. The point of architecture is that you take hard choices and you say this is more important than that, and that's the role of the architect, to be able to choose between these parameters, and that is also why there are 60 different solutions for one set question.
You're talking about speculation, actually.
I feel we are getting banal and boring. Yesterday we had a very interesting discourse here about history without mentioning history. It was by Nelkam Shaya from India, who told us about his teaching of the tacit knowledge of traditional building and fabrication methods. I found it absolutely fascinating, and now we like to open up the 10 by 10. I think you've been in the 10. Could you please help us? Is this history for you, or is this only a technical approach of an alternative kind?
No, I think it's definitely history, because...
It's not loud enough? No, yeah. Close.
Is that working now? Yeah.
Closer.
Still closer?
Yeah.
Okay, like that. Yes. Well, yeah, no, it is historical, because our society lives in 3,000 years. We have space activity, and we have people who are working with bamboo sticks on the ground. And that whole history is available all the time, so that the student can imagine different ways of encountering the world. And history, I think, is about, I think she said, the space is complex, the parameters are not narrowed down. And I think that is the value of all the knowledges that exist. And that is why yesterday I also said that there is a distributed knowledge instead of the concentrated knowledge in the university. And that distributed knowledge sometimes looks very trivial, but there's so many different things that open up with that you will never find if you're following a single line of inquiry. And I think the interesting thing is not the single line of inquiry, but all these zigzags which are colliding with each other, and then you get something much more dynamic. So history is not only the historian will need to write it in a way in which it makes sense, but the actual history is so complex, and it can be read in 200, 300, 500 different ways. And I think that's the very important thing for the School of Architecture.
But you know, I understand that, but at the same time, in that, what's the role of university as a kind of institution? If the whole knowledge is spread around and you can just pick it up, then what's the role of the university?
Yes,
and that's the.
There are different kinds of instruments with which you look. We had binoculars, which were developed, and then we have microscopes, and maybe we have kaleidoscopes, and the university is a kind of instrument or a set of instruments that the university gives to the student and says, these are the many ways in which you can look. And actually it doesn't give even, the teacher himself has to become an instrument and be in that situation, and the student looking at the teacher probably becomes another kind of instrument. And I think that's the university space, that we are finding out ways of looking more than finding out ways of solving. I don't think it's about solutions. Solutions will be there in practice.
Is anybody implementing this tacit knowledge or this other approach to history in his education in the sense of interdisciplinary approach?
Should we end today this whole symposium with history?
No. We have
no. I'm a little bit
enough time. But I didn't hear any concluding remark on this.
You're on the panel. We will not have.
Oh, it's me. Oh, now, okay. You know, I guess I was more sort of interested in sort of the issue of this kind of how we go beyond the kind of limit that the university has. Basically, no matter what, we have a university, and then the basic requirement is to kind of provide the training and the basic sort of knowledge to the student. No matter how you say it, that's why the student is coming. But also the question is, then we don't want to have that's as the only task that we have. We want to go beyond that. That's why you have a Y factory, and then because we want to see the university as an instrument to push the sort of a definition of the architecture and the possibility of it. But right now, the thing that I think today's panel or yesterday's panel was set to see more the possibility, how we can do that within the framework that we have, and what kind of a sort of idea that you have, and to go beyond this. And I'm a little bit having sort of a problem because I want to know about it, and I just want to hear about it. And is there any way that we can talk about that, or am I being too selfish?
It's up to you.
It's up to me. Okay.
Yeah.
No, for instance, okay, our case, UCLA's case, that we gave up to establish such things within the basic program. So we set up the totally different environment, and we set up totally different programs so that the research and the sort of providing basic education can coexist. But still, there's a many issue, that you have to face. The research, I think that Michael and the other people were discussing that the difficulty of sort of pursuing research, or maybe that becomes more like a project that you have to kind of follow the order of the clients and so So, yeah, for instance, I don't know why factory works and functions that well, but I assume that the more that's independent sort of a facility and a research institute beside the actual curriculum. Okay, and your institute?
I think our institute sits because it's a thank you, because it's a research-based institute. So what the school is sort of divided between teaching and research, and we sit within the research part. We teach a lot, but we come from the research part, and the way that it exists is really that it's like setting up a little fence and then trying to feed the little field that you constructed in there through research funding. So everything is self-funded within that space, and the way that we are working is really through finding people who want to collaborate with us on research questions. Am I answering what you're? No.
Yeah, but I'm just curious.
Yeah.
So you don't have to.
We teach a lot, but we're not involved in the daily teaching of the curriculum. So the school is understood in the way that it has a series of departments in which the students are sitting, and that the researchers they're then being taught by teachers, and then there's also researchers that come in with knowledge at other crossroads. So our daily task is in the research field, but the students are very much part of the culture. But they come, it's a different relationship.
Mm. This is not the kind of discussion I really find exciting. Let's try to climb the last mountain, the collaboration mountain, not political collaboration as in Vichy, but collaboration with external partners, the outsourcing of municipal or governmental tasks to freelance low-budget students. In Braunschweig, in the middle of nowhere, our municipal government is very eager to give us a task to design bus stations or new lighting systems, because they don't have to pay for it and they are not obliged to realize it afterwards if they don't like it. And we are very distant now to these offerings. Yesterday we heard a lot of, also today we heard a lot of interesting collaboration things. The most important from Michael Speaks, this Kentucky experience, very, very fascinating. According to this, a question turned other way, posed other way. What was the worst experience in collaboration with partners outside of the university in your life, Hitoshi? What really went wrong? What do you regret most?
No, actually, I've been very careful about this issue, so that we try to carefully frame the relationship so that they don't become the boss. That it's not. We don't take basically the kind of a. Let's say the collaborator as a client. They have to actually sort of work with us to set even the series of questions and requirements to do that. So we don't really sort of provide sets of sort of final project. That what we do is actually trying to actually sort of a research and develop certain visions, and so in that way we don't really kind of get forced by this client to kind of follow or be obedient to their need. And if you set this kind of things wrong, then that becomes really strange things. For instance, UCLA 20 years ago, we had an institution called the Urban Innovation Group. And what happened was that it was, I think, created by Charles Moore. And initially, what happened was it became kind of a professional sort of entity within the university, which serves to the community and it serves to, basically they designed it with the students and so on. And initially, it seems like it's really great so that the students can have a training and you can work on a real project. But at the end, what happened was that they started to compete against the local architects. They started to actually somehow train students so that there's no differences with the local offices. And that's the worst nightmare that any academic university could have. And we don't want to repeat that trouble again.
I think if we make a photography now of this podium with the subtitle, "The Sleeping Sherpas." Please wake up, people. Give me the worst experience of your collaboration experience.
I don't think that the question makes really so much
boring.
sense. That's the problem.
Put the blame on me, but please.
No, but if you, I mean, I don't have so much experience in working with governmental or with politicians in this kind of research. But first of all, I think when we talk about research, or in most of the cases, it's applied research. It means that in the end, you as an architect show or visualize what is the kind of speculation after this theoretical research, so you apply it. And I only have experience with collaborating with the industry. So if you talk about the worst case, I think the worst case, there is no really worst case. Maybe there are different opinions in the end. So for example, you talk with the marketing guys, or you talk with the research and development guys when you work together. So this is already very concrete, but there's a big difference in applied research when you work and collaborate with the industry, with a company, for example. That it's absolutely necessary that there's a real collaboration and not only a kind of question and then you answer the question. No, you have to really deal with their problems, and you have also to have these people in your studio or however you teach to really have an exchange of information and a continuously working conversation between these. If this is not happening, then this would be probably the worst case, that you come up with something and you find it really great, but the company or the industry can't do anything with it.
So we open now the discussion for
the
public.
Can I add to that, Michael, one moment, please? Because I think it was very good that you said that that students are cheap production cattle for ministries and for eldermen to do some kind of design work and research work, and it's very true. And there's more, and somehow a protocol would be not bad to have, or a kind of criticism from the school's part to do that. And I agree with that you say that you refrain from that. Second element, of course, is that many teachers, but there's a paradox in architecture education by nature, because then, especially in the first 3 years, you give students a site, and they have to make a solution for a design for that, which could have been done better by an architect or somewhere. So there it starts already. So somehow we can't refrain from that, but how do we become more theoretical is my question in that way. How to judge that kind of applications, and the worst, to be honest, is Zaha, who always misuses their students because she makes 20 same operas in Guangzhou before she makes her own opera, which I think is, ooh, this year we get something interesting that the public body finances her projects. So I think it's an intriguing paradox how to deal with that you raise. How to where we have a training system that's about simulation, but can we become smarter in that? Can we become more theoretical in that? Can we become more advanced and experimental in that? That's what I want to add to your observation.
I would pass a question to Christoph. I know the UDK is in the urban planning engaged in the Charlottenburg, Spreebogen Science City and new creative things, and it's for me terrible the word creative and urbanism. But how can I say? instrumentalized by public planning agencies and by contributing to the student work to the image-producing marketing campaigns of Berlin planning authorities?
No, I don't think so. I'm not sure. I don't know this project that you mentioned, but what we did is we did, like all other schools as well, we did case studies about specific places in Berlin to give, I don't know, more ideas about discussions, about directions of new discussions. This is what we are doing, but we never getting paid for such activities. What we did in the last 3 years, we set up a kind of Y factory that it's called a hybrid platform, and this is a transdisciplinary platform of researcher or scientists from the technical university and applied designer, architects, and artists as well from UDK, because we believe that this we need a special place maybe, because especially technical university has the feeling that there's not enough freedom to think and to think maybe, and they see in the University of the Arts a place where there's much more of this freedom. Unfortunately, this is not the case, so we set up a new place, and we hope we will be successful to have a real think tank, what we thought is original university as place. This is what we're trying to do, and there we have to be really careful, because of course, we need of course funding as well for this platform, and there you have it's a very difficult task to decide who, for which money you can apply and who can fund you and who not. And it's very difficult, because if you want to become more independent and you are not funded by the public, then it's very, very difficult to solve this. It's more or less not really solvable.
So yeah, please.
I wanted to react to what Hitoshi was questioning. When do you become a competition to offices, to professionals? And I think that's where the academy or schools have a specific capacity, which is to be non-commercial, and hence it's not to respond to existing questions, but it's to orient design capacity to those questions that are not yet out there in the political or market atmosphere or climates out there. And I think that's one of the, let's say, that's a clear ambition that should maybe be in the protocol that Winnie is suggesting, because that's where the academia should develop capacity to research, but also to change cultures. And if you look at how from design work to research you can actually recreate or stimulate new climates in which suddenly also politicians start to believe that design capacity can provide answers to questions that they had never imagined to pose, then I think the academia can have a real collaboration with the outside world. Maybe a second remark, the discussion before went a bit about the power, the kind of the integration power of architecture. Architecture being everything, let's say, nearly the world was described as architecture, or as an architectural problem. I think there's a danger there in trying to educate our architectural students with the belief that they can cope with everything from A to Z, from the beginning to the end, from the question to the answer, to the complete answer. I think it's very important to explore on which fields design can work, can be used, applied. But I think the output of schools should not be purely or only architects that believe in their authorship from A to Z, even for global problems. So the question is, what types of professionals do architecture schools produce? On the one hand, it's the authorship architect, which produces buildings, but there's also many more people with capacities that should maybe be placed in other positions in order to make sure that policies economy is directed in other ways, is let's say situating architecture or design capacity in other situations. So I think it's a danger to claim, or as an output of this conference, to say finally we're going back to the big narrative for architecture, we're going to solve the problems. I don't think that's a good solution. We can maybe do piece by piece somewhere, but design capacity can be applied much broader than in the build world.
But yesterday we learned that at this moment worldwide 1 million students are trained in architecture, which know exactly that nobody will listen to them. And you say it's good that you have this self-observation. You will not be listened because you are not discourse integrating, because your skills are not very encompassing. Yesterday this message was very depressing. That the whole youth in the architectural formation is in this situation of traumatizing knowledge about them being ignored.
Maybe the pessimism. What is the saying? The optimism of will and what comes before. I don't know, but architecture is clearly a profession in which you try to analyze what is the situation and propagate something. So it's necessarily optimistic, and it's of course when you're optimistic and try to address problems that are bigger than yourself, you will always need to be humble because it will never work completely. So it's a fake discussion. It's a kind of hitting yourself on the back to go faster forward, you could say. So I think that's it's a lament that we can continue to have, but it's meaningless as a debate. We should simply, let's say, address design capacities on those questions that are not yet addressed, and as long as we do so, we will convince people, and if we build narratives and the capacity to argue about that, we will convince people. Will we convince everyone? No. Can somebody in the world convince everyone? Not even Obama on Syria. So,
so Hitoshi, do you want to respond, or did you?
Oh, no. Okay. I'd like to respond to that because I totally agree with you. We were talking yesterday about. Oh,
louder.
Sorry, closer, I'll stand up. No, I agree with you. And I think it's an interesting profession because I think we're the only profession where we combine left and right brain, right? So you'll have always in the architecture study people who go left brain, I forget which one's which, or right brain. And then you have the few, we call them probably the, whatever was called yesterday, the heroes who have left and right brain and they manage to do everything. But I think beyond that, the question of education and how you maybe could participate in education in society is, I think, really close to what was just mentioned, in the sense that as an architecture student, you have a capacity, you have the time. You actually sit all day working on, whatever you're doing. You have the time to actually go into a problem. So what we try to do with the postgraduate students is to actually delve into a series of collaborations which are high-end. We started simple, and now slowly we get invited by cities, we get invited by developers. And the only thing we promise is that we will look at what they're asking, but we are going to give 100-year-away solution. We are not going to solve the problem for today. And I thought originally we did that and we were apologizing because of course it does end up, as was mentioned before, in fancy forms and a lot of fluffy forms. Fuzzy is actually better. I love fuzzy logic. But, coming back to not being judgmental, it is really interesting to be able, as an educational institution, to be that far ahead and to start these discussions with cities and developers, because no one else can. We in our practice we try and educate our clients, we try to push them further, and it is really hard. So what I love about being in educational institutions is that we can, and where I was apologizing in the beginning, look, sorry, this is not very applied, da, da, da. In the end, what we get is more and more people and cities and whatever coming to us and saying, can you look at this with us? And not because they want us to build or replace the architects or do anything like that, but just because I realize there are a lot of things going on in the world where people really have no clue what to do with. and that we in academics, we have a lot of time, we can spend the time, we have the technologies, we have the amazing people who come out of their practice and will give their few hours a week and actually think about those things with us. So I think for me, as I was also very depressed yesterday, I feel in the academic institutions, like you are doing also in a completely other way, we have that responsibility, but also it is so much fun, because I think every one of us is frustrated with certain problems, but how amazing that in academic institutions we can start to solve the tiniest minute problems for the next 100 years, and then hopefully at some point, it's a little bit like the car industry. They work on a new prototype, it looks really cool and really amazing, and what they do in reality is they'll take the new headlights for the next car. But they know deep in their heart, you know, in the next 100 years, we're going to get that car they were designing. So I think that is really important, to keep that positive and but also seriously involved attitude. Because if we are going to stand back and going to say, like, okay, we can't help, and you know, this is not going to go anywhere, it's like the end of the educational institution.
No, let me respond to him.
Quick response.
Can I respond to him? Yeah. I kind of waited. Sorry.
Okay, Hitoshi and then you.
Okay, now me. Okay. You mentioned, so I think I will just respond to where we stand. We means UCLA. For instance, I think Tom Main's project for New Orleans is a really interesting example, that it was built to provide the house for the people who lost the houses by Hurricane Katrina. But what we did was, or he did was actually not only just to provide the affordable house, but he pushed it a little bit, not for 100 years ahead, but 5 to 10 years ahead. So the house itself is actually floats when the agenda that proposed by Make It Right Foundation is to build the house on top of the column and 5 to 10 feet above the ground, so that when the water comes, then it's okay. But Tom's question and their team's question is, but if you do that, then you will have a house totally detached from the ground that basically kills the kind of a formation of the community. So he actually put this kind of new foundation which floats above the water, so that it comes back in, and there's, you know, so in a way he took this social agenda, but also turned it into much, not just only providing solution, but pushed a little bit more, much farther, so that there's a kind of more universal theme that could be actually innovative, and it could be. So I think that is very important for university to have, not just to respond to the given condition. And that's, I believe that's very important. How to make it happen, and what kind of mechanism, and also how to gain such a freedom, that's what I'm really interested in. So one way is, say, 100 years from now, or, you know, I think that's very essential.
Well, some solutions you think are 100 years away.
Well, I think also that 100-year, like if you talk about like in the very far future, it's an alternative. I mean, that can happen, but it's not necessary to happen. So it's more like something to look into and explore it. And I think that, I mean, I think that's how I understood you. If we have now so many architectural students, I think it's great. It could be great, because they can also be in many other disciplines and maybe further some design issues and so on. Of course, and we should not kind of slap our back, as you said, like finding it wrong. But of course, if all these students come out of university and cannot get employed, that would be really bad. And I think in looking into disciplinarity, I think that's why I don't really agree with Winka, because I think maybe, I don't know about the left and the right brain, but I'm quite positive there are other disciplines who equally think that they can heal the world or something. And I think in interdisciplinary would mean that we can let them stand. I mean, that's also the humbleness. There is maybe a geographer or an artist or a medicine or whatever, they think that's their solution. And it's fine. They have another solution, and interdisciplinarity would mean that we can talk to them and maybe together really look for different worlds, or maybe better worlds. I don't know if that exists.
I want to respond to the make it right issue of Tom, Because there it shows the line between commerce and schools. That house should have been called the UCLA boat instead of a Tom Main house, because somewhere you sponsored that enterprise much more than his own. So I do think that there you see how do we credit this, and how do we credit in this case? Hey, you as a school did more on that house than he did in his commercial practice. But let's decide. Only to add to the discussions on where is the protocol, or where is it?
Another question from the public. Everybody's very exhausted, but there's a question. Yeah?
A comment.
Ich glaube, hier war schon länger.
You often refer to the difference of reality and academia, as if academia is outside of reality, as if it's some sort of monastery or something where you isolate yourself from the world. I think this is a crucial aspect and an attitude if you think about education, so you don't have any chance to get in touch with the reality if you think it like this. So I think we should focus much more on this practice of education, of the reality of teaching and such. And if you think like that, you see that all things you seem to be outside are inside your world of teaching. You are in a room, maybe it's not the best room you can imagine, maybe you are sitting on a chair, maybe it's not the best chair. You have an environment of learning and teaching. So this is the point where you can start with, and this is extremely urgent, since every 3 years maybe the generation changes of our students. So I think if you take this really serious, so teaching is an overwhelming question for us, and we can ask who did teach us teach. How do we know to deal with that questions? Therefore, the question, what is a good teacher? We don't know to answer, since nobody taught us what is a good teaching. So we are swimming around, and this is the point we are dealing in our project, that at first instance we direct questions about design and architecture to the situation of research and education and learning. And in this sense, I think interdisciplinary experience and teaching young people is quite similar. If I start to work with a mathematician whose formula I don't know, I'm as feel as stupid as maybe the beginner of something. But we have to think about the privilege to be beginners and how to organize that, and then we have too much reality, I would say, in academia, and this is a good deal. So this only that an argument for the deep reality, and don't wait for the catastrophes that start only when you go out of academia.
Any direct response for this, or there was a?
Yeah? Yes, my name is Lena Wimmer. I'm also from the UDK. And
we cannot see you, we cannot hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm Lena Wimmer from the UDK as well.
Can you come
here?
Okay, come here, come, please.
Not so far away.
Hello. So I maybe want to think again about the question about history, and is it obsolete? And yesterday and also today we always had the question about the role of architecture and the university. Is it still something we need, or what is it in general? And I have the feeling like the German word Geschichte means history, but also story. And it's more, so also the story you tell. So every state has its own history, and everybody has its own history. And I believe that only if you know your own history, you are able to react on something. So you have to know something about what you tell. And for that reason, I really believe that as students, we have to learn as much by ourselves. And we always choose what we want to know. And then we can, on the university, be maybe more specific about something really specific, a question. For example, also Alberti yesterday, he was mentioned, showed not 200 years ago what was the history, or 300 years ago, or maybe he saw this and he knew all about it, but he talked only about the truth because he used him and he needed him. And also Corbusier know, I think, a lot about history. Then he said history is nothing important anymore, but he went to the Acropolis and so on. So he was very precise about what he wanted to talk because he knew a lot. And I think this is maybe work for everybody, and we all can only learn as much as we can, but we have to try. And then on the university, we have the possibility to meet others who can tell their specific story about what they know, and they know something else. And I think that's still the chance for universities to meet in physical or also non-physical, but you have debates and so on. This is maybe something very simple, but it affords a lot of work to be precise and also really read one book. Maybe not 100, but like me, he took 30 books to America. And
what's the question?
It's no question. It's about, I believe that history is still something we all need, and it's nothing stops. I think we create our own history until we die, and we always have to think about it.
And do you get enough history at the UDK, if you ask your president?
It's now very difficult.
After the death of Jonas Geist, I think there's a lack. There's a real big gap.
I mean, for example, I had the chance. I can go to the library every day, and I can have discussions at the university, but it's also my own homework in a way. But then it's very important that you have good conversations at the university, but you can have them only if you have a good basis. So I think it's for everybody work that never ends.
Thank you very much. The real, authentic students attending our summit and teaching us about the role of history. So we are very excited. We are completely stiff with information. We cannot breathe anymore. Shall I try to draw conclusions? Shall I try to motivate you, inspire you for a last? More questions? Oh, okay. Two. Okay. You're like a Duracell rabbit. You never stop.
I don't know if this is actually a question, though. Maybe it's more of a statement, although there might be some responses. And I appreciate the metaphor of the mountain, but I really feel that this session, in many ways, no one's feet has been really planted on the ground. And I think that this conference deserves to be maybe a little bit clearer, in that so much of what architects do is not just design. And everything that we've been talking about for the past 2 days is really in the realm of design. But architects have to deal with contractual matters, and they have to deal with construction matters. I mean, there's a whole myriad of things, but we could at least say that there are these other things that architects need to do, and they're really mechanisms that we use to advance our practice. And this maybe picks up a little bit on the point from Brussels, that there are several different layers of mechanism, and I really think that it would be beneficial for us to at least acknowledge that and clarify a little bit where we stand. Are we really just talking about design? Is that all architects do? Because if that is all architects, well, I think it's a bubble if we think that's all architects do.
You forgot one thing. The 90% of an architect's profession now is to be a lawyer. I think to be engaged in juridical questions is so intense that you cannot design, that you cannot communicate.
I would like to just give a statement, because I think it's very important. Of course, we're talking a lot about architecture, buildings, and design, and we didn't talk about what you just mentioned, which is indeed a lot of work of the architect today. I would even add something which not which wasn't discussed during this conference, it's actually the education in the office. So the education in a practice, but this might be also something for the future. And I know that especially today, many students work in offices, complain about their situations, but still it's a very valuable way to learn and to get educated. And this was my best teacher was the one who was actually the first architect I worked for, and not the university. So I think this whole thing, what you just mentioned and came up with, it's very important. We can think about discussing this during the fourth conference then, but I think it's absolutely valuable.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Maybe I can. I think we didn't get our feet on the ground, and still I think this was a very useful event for me. I just picked up 3 questions that I will probably carry along, and the first question was raised yesterday: what is architecture? And the second was raised today: what is a good teacher? And the third question is, what is a university? So if somebody said a good school is when the students wake up in the morning and ask, what is architecture? I couldn't imagine, let's say, Frank Lloyd Wright getting up in the morning at 4 o'clock, what he actually did, asking himself, what is architecture? I would probably go wrong and not right. And I think he ran to his drawing table and started to draw something and saying, well, I will show you what architecture is. And I think now maybe you run to your computer and you start scripting and you will say, well, I show you what architecture is. Well, you're not always asking yourself what is architecture, except for in a summit like this, when you realize that there is a certain there is an uncertainty somehow. So I think when Wright went to his table, he was drawing something very new. So I think in a way architecture is purely connected to something that is new. I think there is no architecture when you are producing something old. So I think that's an essential point, that you have to make something new. I would say even in the classical architecture there is something new. There is a lot of change and mutation and transformation and things like that. And that's about history when history comes into the game. And you can find out in a lifetime what things are all about. So then architecture, yes, something new. And well, he was making new spaces that had never been envisioned in anywhere. So I think architecture is clearly about making new spaces. And then what is a good teacher? Of course, he's connected to this question of making new spaces. And I don't think necessarily he has to be young. He can also be quite old, as you were saying. Aldo van Eyck was always every day doing something new. And well, and what is a university? And I think then a university is a place made maybe in that way, as something new. And then the Y factory is a new sphere in the university. So university as a space where you deal with universal values is I think a good question to carry along. So these are my 3 questions, and I think they are somehow dealt with but not really answered, but that's good.
So now we close.
I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry. The last, the very last, yeah?
It's okay. Sarah again, and I come from Houston, which is...
Wait. No, that you don't cross the line, but you come to here.
You never make them come to us.
Yeah.
That's my rebellion. Here. They never come here. So... Our room is about to rebel. Now, so I come from Houston, which is at sea level, so I have a little trouble with the mountain climbing, I guess. But I do wonder, one question is, because I think the teaching question is very interesting, but how many of the people in this room were actually taught how to teach? Or how many people in this room teach our students how to become teachers? And I think that that's something, architecture is a funny field because the teaching, it's not, at least in the States, it's not typically based on the PhD model. So the role of teaching as a discipline, as a methodology of pedagogy, tends to be at the PhD level in higher education. So at the master's level, at what point are architects taught how to teach architecture?
Eliminate.
I think that's a really important point, but I think I don't think we should think that the only model is architecture school teaching people to be architecture teachers. And our colleagues from Copenhagen who were in the university, in the School of Pedagogy, who then work with architecture professors to help them teach and explore methods and undertake research to know how to be effective teachers and how to find new methods of imparting knowledge. So I think I just wanted to say that this is maybe one area where we could have real interdisciplinary strategies with schools of pedagogy, not for architecture per se, but for our teaching methods.
Okay. No question anymore. We are on time. Frankly speaking, I will refrain from giving to you my conclusion of this summit. It was called 10 Tasks for the New Millennium, but it's too late. I will give it to you in the next meeting in 2 years. And thank you very much for this Sherpa exercise. And I think we are now back to sea level and we have ground under our feet. And now the closing remarks of Martha, Hitoshi, and Kristin. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, very briefly, I have nothing more to say. I think you're probably... Everyone is a little bit exhausted and saturated. I guess I just have two things. One is to sincerely thank everyone who came, who participated either on a panel or 10 by 10, and to the people who came and stimulated the discussion and debate in the audience. This is a totally informal group. It's not under the auspices of any organization or professional organization or institution. So to come here is because we want to be together, because we have something to share. And the effort that you've made to find those points of sharing is really appreciated. The second point I would like to make is, in this type of conference, there's always a lot of very positive outcomes, but I think there's always some level of frustration or desire for more or different. Please write down the themes or the areas that you would like to be addressed in the fourth conference in 2 years. And it's a long way down the road, but your help in forming the debate and framing the discussion would be enormously beneficial. And you can send that to AAES, to Dunja, Hans-Jürgen, Kristin, or Hitoshi and myself. Thanks very much.
I just want to say thank you to all of you who came here, and also, of course, wants to say thank you to Kristin and Hans-Jürgen, where are you? And everybody at the IAES Gallery for hosting such a fantastic event. And also, I don't know how you managed to have this blue sky, so that was very, very present. And we are still kind of in discussion about the next event, but most likely will happen in Asia. And we look forward to see you again. And trust me, I'm confused as you are and a little frustrated too. So see you. Thank you.
So the very last words, thanks, is done. Martha already talked about the fourth summit. To Martha and to Hitoshi, we are very grateful that we did this summit together, that you asked us, that we could hold it here. We are very happy that all the participants we were writing months ago agreed immediately, and we know this job, so this was a bit unusual. So this was great, and finally, what was even more important, they all came. So from far away, partly, thank you very much. My personal statement would be, beside ups and downs and confusion, this is good. I enjoyed these days very much. And the discussions and the controversies, and it was so good when we were outside, the weather we had ordered already, this was clear, and then we were looking at all of you and how you talked to each other, how you changed your cards, and how you immediately said, oh, there is a project we can do together. That's it is about. And this wonderful group of people here, and having also joy in the evening and like to talk to each other and not to say, okay, the conference is finished, let's go to another place and see nice people. I really enjoyed it, and we hope very, very much. Different occasion, maybe also at the next conference, we see us again, and I made great experience with meeting not only old friends, but also new people. Thank you very, very much. And now we have coffee and something, and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
One second. I'm very sorry. 1 second. No, there's no confusion. There's just... Huh? Sorry? No, that's okay. Please stay for a minute. Please, we want to thank our entire team, Oliver, Eric, Jan, all of them who have taken care on you, Miriam, but especially also we want to thank Dunja and Joanna, because they were entirely packed with lots of work to make this happen. So please come here. I know you don't want it. I hope we didn't miss anybody to mention, but thank you so much.